thank you again for joining me on this interview today. It's a little bit different. I think we met when COVID started, right after everything shut down, and then we connected on LinkedIn through, I think it was Sustainable Brands maybe, and so here we are. So I am Hayley Hoffman, CEO of Dandi, because there's probably people here or that are going to be here watching this recording who have no idea who I am, and that's okay. But Dandi is a conscious beauty firm, bridging ingredient companies doing good for the people and the planet, and brands that have the reach to do that one and create that change one person at a time. And I'm based here in Los Angeles, California. And when I read your profile on LinkedIn, I was like, oh my gosh, I think we have really similar values and we should be doing something and collaborating in some kind of way. So we thought an interview would be a good place to start. So would you like to introduce yourself, Andrej, or I can introduce you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, hi everyone, my name's Andrej Morgan. So I am the co-founder and CEO of For Good Profits. So we work with natural and sustainable brands and really helping them to unlock profitable growth in their business by really implementing sort of acquisition, conversion, retention systems. And I'm sure we'll dive into a bit more of what that looks like, but we're really focused in on helping those natural and sustainable brands grow and make sure they're doing it profitably, which is obviously very important.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm on one end of the spectrum when it comes to brands. I'm on like the supply chain side, working with those ingredient manufacturers, and you're all the way at the end. So I know that people that are watching this are all going to be somewhere in the middle, and I think both parts can really benefit. So I know that we all kind of have an idea of what e-commerce is, but I would just like to hear from you, from your perspective, how would you define an e-commerce brand?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, essentially an e-commerce brand is a brand that is selling direct to customer via their online store. Obviously, you can be doing that, via something like Amazon, but we tend to work with brands that are selling direct to customer via their online store. Now, that's not to say that they don't also have, wholesale relationships or selling in, retailers and things. But the focus of what we're helping brands do is grow their e-commerce store, which is their owned store that's selling direct to customer.
I mean, we're seeing that be more and more important now, especially even since we first met. The world has changed dramatically, so I think this is a really great time to be having this conversation. And I know that you mentioned some of the platforms like Amazon and maybe some wholesale relationships. But are there other platforms that you see that that brands are using for introductions, educating, engaging, and eventually selling to their customers? And like, what do those platforms look like?
Yeah, well, essentially, obviously, you have your store, which maybe Shopify or maybe WooCommerce. At the end of the day, any of those, it doesn't matter too much about the tech when it comes to your store. You can grow a very successful, purpose-driven brand with either one of those or another. That's as far as the store goes. But as far as educating and selling and things, I mean, it's kind of the way we conceptualize it. It's broken into sort of three parts. There's the acquisition, like how does a brand go out and acquire customers? So that the most effective way to do that, and the way that we help our brands to do that is via paid advertising on Instagram and Facebook. So those, and then when it comes to that, there's many different aspects to that. There's education, there's positioning, there's simply selling your product as well, making sure that there's a call to action, getting people to buy your product. So that's sort of the acquisition, Facebook and Instagram. And then the retention side of things, that the best platform out there to use is Klaviyo. So that's an e-commerce focused email automation system. But we can dig into sort of those in a bit more detail later in the conversation. But those are really the platform. It does matter because, for example, with email, Klaviyo is, in our opinion, the best platform for e-commerce stores, because it's designed for e-commerce. So it's going to be easier to use. It's focused on sort of the customer journeys that e-commerce stores have. So the software or the platform does matter in that sense, but at the end of the day, they are just a means to get your message, to the right person at the right time. What you're putting into those platforms, like what we call like the purpose-driven message to market fit, the education, how you're communicating, and also how good your product, solves a solution for a customer. Like, that's the most important thing. You can put really bad inputs, bad education, bad advertising, a bad product. If you put that into a great system, it won't do anything. It's the inputs that matter, which is something that we really help brands focus on and understand, like how to do that as well.
And yeah, the more all the webinars that I've been attending over the past weeks have talked about brands that have values, and those are really the brands that are lasting. There has to be some depth, right? It's no longer can you just be floating out there and not having depth to you. So you mentioned the customer journey. So I am interested on your thoughts on curating a customer journey versus observing a customer journey, and like, how are they different? Are they the same? And if there's advantages or disadvantages to either one of those.
What do you mean by observing?
Like, do you just wait to see what a customer is doing or a group of customers are doing over time, and then you eventually start directing their journey? Or is it is the customer telling you how their journey is going to be, or as a brand, do you go ahead and start creating that customer journey up front?
Yeah.
It's a good question, or if it's
no, it's a great question.
Okay.
I think it comes to the heart of effective conversational commerce, as we call it. Having a conversation with your customers, and that's by adding value and by being a real brand. And as you said, the big advantage that purpose-driven brands, natural, sustainable, ethical brands that have a purpose other than just making money. Obviously, making money is important because you've got to be profitable and to grow and to stay alive. But a brand that has something other than just that, so they have a purpose behind it, they have a huge advantage, because in today's world, that purpose, like that can't be copied. That is your purpose. That's your story, and that's your big differentiation. So that's sort of speaking to that first point. But as far as observing or directing a customer journey, it always comes back to being customer centric. So understanding the behavior of your customers, and what I mean by that is what your customers are actually doing, because things have sort of moved away from just understanding your customer as a demographic. That's still part of it, but it's not just my customer is 30 to 40 years old, female or male, lives in this area. That is part of it, but with really making sure that you're getting the right message to the right person at the right time, and curating a really individualized customer journey, a different journey for each person depending on what they've done. That's really based on behavior. So the kind of behavior that a customer is taking, how have they interacted with you? Is it the first time that they've interacted with you? Are they been with you for 3 or 4 years? Have they been just interacting with you for a year, but they've never bought anything off you? So understanding those individual journeys, and then curating that journey based off of the behavior. So you are actually listening. So what some educational content that you might send to a first-time buyer is probably going to be quite different from educational content you're sending to a buyer who's bought off you for a 6th time, because by now they understand your core principles, and maybe they're at like a higher level, so they need a different journey. So I think it's a mixture of curating and listening, but it always comes back to listening, because you're basing your message and your automation and your discussion based off behavior. I think that answers your question.
Thank you. And it's just been a very short amount of time that we're seeing more and more programs coming out for artificial intelligence type of automations that are trying to read that consumer behavior on these different programs that can help connect and make that journey so it can be pretty fluid.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in the purpose-driven space, when I say purpose-driven, it's just a way of sort of bringing people together that are natural, sustainable, ethical, whatever it may be, people that are driving change with their product and their value. Sometimes the word automation can be a little bit scary because, and it's understandable because it can kind of sound a little bit dehumanizing in a way, like a bit robotic, and not why you got into the business in the first place. You got into help people and make change, and then you throw the words sort of automation and AI around. It can sometimes seem a little bit, as I said, dehumanizing. But essentially, those tools are just a way for you to make sure that you're communicating to each customer individually based on where they're at, instead of just treating your entire customer base as this big clump of collective that you just sort of say the same thing to everyone. Like everyone's unique, everyone's different, everyone's at a different part of their journey. So that's what automation and these things like AI and basing off behaviors, that's what that helps you do as a brand. It helps you actually communicate and help people in the best possible way, because some people aren't ready for certain parts of your journey or your education. Some people are.
I can identify with that for sure. I'm sorry, we probably should have covered this before, but at the beginning, so why purpose-driven brands? Why is it that you see, are you so focused on purpose-driven brands and seeing those maybe do better, just from our discussion, they tend to do better with your program than a brand that doesn't have a purpose, another purpose behind it, but besides being profitable?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose a little bit about like myself and my business partner out with co-founders. Our journey is, I started out directing years ago, and as in directing film, and my partner was a cinematographer, or still is a cinematographer, and we were making beautiful, this is quite a few years back now, but we were making beautiful videos for agencies and brands, and we weren't selective around that. We were simply, as people do, we were trying to make a living back then, and we were making videos for big brands, small brands, ethical brands, maybe non-ethical brands that didn't have sort of a purpose behind them. And we got, we saw the realities of what were happening behind brands, behind closed doors, and we decided that two things really. Like, one was just a purely, based off our own values and our own sort of idea of kinds of people and kinds of change that we wanted to help bring about. So that's obviously one of the reasons that we steered towards, helping purpose-driven brands. But to be honest, the other one too was that we saw that there was a change as well, and that brands that have this purpose, they have this differentiation and this leverage, or this ability to leverage their story and their purpose and something that can unite a tribe around. They have that. They don't have to make it up. They don't have to pretend, like many big brands do, sort of pretend to have this sort of purpose behind them, because they're understanding that this is a thing they should do now. These brands already have it. It's built into their DNA. And so we really wanted to help these brands that had this to understand how to leverage that and how to actually bring it into their messaging and into their marketing and their advertising, so that they can use it for good, essentially, because it's real and it's there to be utilized. Yeah.
I totally feel where you're coming from. Like, it's not so much different being on the supply side selling ingredients. The audience just looks a little bit different. Like, the brands that you're working with are my target audience as well, trying to connect with them to help them make products that have that purpose-driven message to it. So the purpose-driven message from the companies I work with are sustainable. So using like biotech or using green processes to make an actual ingredient, reducing carbon footprint through some of those patented processes, and trying to match make those ingredients with with these purpose-driven brands so they can all be working together and creating that change that you're talking about. I think that the world is really looking for meaning, as we suffer from our first world problems, right? We have everything that we need. We have food, we have shelter, we have really, really cushy lives. And then especially when you're looking into cosmetics and things that I would really consider a luxury. Not everybody has access to hygiene, let alone having, I don't know, I have maybe like 20 shades of lipstick in my dresser, and so it does help, and I think it makes sense to give back where we can. So
yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit on a point there, is that people want to do good in the world. It's just that sometimes it's hard to know. It's a busy world. Maybe what's been happening lately has slowed us down a bit, which has been nice. Obviously some many bad things about it too, but one positive about it is that it's made us slow down a little bit. But there's people want to do good, and so if you can provide them a way to do that easily, which is just changing their shopping habits, something they're already going to do, and you make it easy and make it for them to understand how what they're doing is changing the world, then they'll do it. People are inclined to make positive change and make healthy, good choices. It's just you need to make it as easy as it is, and as tantalizing as it is to do the opposite. You need to make that natural and sustainable and ethical choices just as good.
I agree. Thank you. I know that we've been talking about story and as it relates to purpose-driven brands. But how do ingredients fit into that brand storytelling, just from your perspective and the companies that you work with? What is ingredients?
I missed this. How does ingredients, did you say?
Yeah, how important are ingredient creation of brand storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the key is that every differentiation that your brand has is important. So your ingredients, if you're a skincare brand, obviously, or a cosmetics brand, is hugely important. How you use that is another sort of discussion, and I think it really depends on the sophistication of or understanding your market's sophistication or awareness, because it's nice to hear, I've got Kakadu plum or whatever it may be in my product, but for everyone that might not necessarily mean anything. So it's how do I take these sort of abstract ideas, which may be abstract to some people because they don't truly understand the chemicals or the chemistry behind it. How do you take that and then turn that into a story? Because essentially, as humans, we connect with a story. So we've got to take that idea of, this is just a simple ingredient, but then tell a story of why it's important, where it came from, how it does what it does differently than the conventional offerings, how it's changing things, what it will feel like to use, how your life will be different from using it, etc. So the stories around it are what important, less so what the actual chemical is. Obviously, you want it to be a good one and you want it to be something that's ethically sourced and sustainable, but to the customer who may not be at that level of awareness, or maybe it's the first time that they're trying something like this, they need a story to connect with, and that's why your messaging is so important. Yeah, it's how we make stories, how we make sense of the world. So it applies for brands as well. Yeah,
it's definitely. And you mentioned retention, the acquisition and retention. Speak to that a little bit, as we've talked about story and looking at that, how it pertains to your methodology of acquiring more customers, and what that looks like for your program.
Yeah, so we really help brands. An easy way to conceptualize your growth as an e-commerce brand, and something that we really use as sort of like a foundational concept, is you really have like 3 levers or 3 multipliers in your e-commerce brand. The first one is customers. So how many customers have you got? The second one is AOV, so average order value. So how much is a customer spending with you every time they visit? And then the third one is frequency. So how frequently or how often are customers buying from you? So repeat purchases. Those are really the only three levers in your brand. And those are the three things that you need to be focused on. And everything that you do, whether it be advertising, email, could be PR, could be blogging, whatever it may be, those three levers need to be what you come back to. So every time it's sort of like a guiding light. Like you got to ask yourself, like, why am I doing this strategy right now? Is it just because someone told me I should do it, or I read some blog yesterday that said, oh, you must be doing X, Y, Z? Because that's not really a good reason to do something. Like what you're doing, because it's shiny object syndrome. There's so much that you feel like you should be doing as a brand. Every second day there's an article saying 101 ways to grow your e-commerce brand. It can be overwhelming. So these are sort of like the three core multipliers that whenever you're thinking about a strategy or an idea that you want to go with, think, am I increasing the customers here? Is this going to increase the amount of customers? Am I increasing the amount they're spending, or am I increasing the amount of times that they're buying from me, the frequency? And why those three levers are super important to sort of use as your foundational concept is that they're multipliers. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you have, let's just keep it really simple. Just imagine for some reason a brand only has one customer. You have one customer buying and they're spending $50 with you, and they've bought from you once. Multiply those together, 1 by 50 by 1 is $50 is your revenue, right? But if you don't need to double those to double your revenue. You just need to increase each of those by 30%. And the reason for that is that they're multipliers, so they work in conjunction with each other. So instead of having one customer, you have 1.3. Now that sounds strange. How do you have a third of a customer? But when you're dealing with big numbers, it does get into 1.3. So 1.3 customers, now 50 times plus 30%. I'll have to try to work that out in my head. It's just I can't remember what it is in my head. Multiply there, but
18 something.
There you go. 68. We'll go with it. Times 68 and 10 times frequency, which is 1.3. You multiply those three together. I can't do it on my head, but luckily we've got calculators. You would have doubled your revenue. So why that's important is because a lot of the times brands go out there and they think, all right, I want to double in size, right, over the next 6 months. I've got to go out there and double the amount of customers I have. Or I have to go out there and double the amount of times people are buying from me. But that's hard. Like it's hard to move one of those levers to double. It's a big effort, and it costs money. So the easier way to do that is just just raise each of those by just 30%, and then you'll get the doubling of your company. And so it's sort of a way to make sure that the efforts that you're putting in are being spread across the sort of the three different levers in your business. And we can dig into like what each of those levers maybe looks like in more detail if you wanted to.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to hear anything you have to share on this. I guess from my side, I always think about business like the 80-20 rule, right? You always hear that. Like 80% of your business comes from 20% of your customer base. And so for me as my background in sales and marketing, it was always about nurturing those relationships. But I guess I never really thought about it in terms of thirds, like taking that 20%, but then looking at the rest of the 80% and how do I divvy up 66% of my effort over that other 80%. So, which I think is what you're saying, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Similar?
Absolutely. The 80-20 rule is massive, and it applies in everything that you do. It applies with your customers. We see across the board. Yeah, exactly. 80% of your revenue, if you do a breakdown of your brand, 80% of your revenue would generally come from about 20% of your customers. It's not a steadfast rule. It fluctuates, but it's pretty damn close to the truth most of the time. And the same applies for your focus and your energy as a brand. And so these three multipliers are a way for you to sort of apply that 80-20 rule to what you're doing as far as your marketing goes, because obviously you have product development and innovation, and that's huge. But the other half of your brand is Yeah, exactly. The other half of your brand is marketing. Like how do I communicate to the customer? And how do I make them understand what I have to offer is a really good solution for their problem. So yeah, that 80-20 rule, this is a way of sort of conceptualizing that for your growth.
Okay. Sorry, I
Yeah.
interrupted you. You're going to go further into each of those
Yeah.
levers as you see them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can speak to how we help brands move those sort of multipliers. And so the first one is customers. Like, how do I increase customers? And the easiest and the fastest and the most efficient way to do that is through a really effective paid advertising. It's the one, it's the fastest because you have direct access to customers. And the second is that it's scalable, and if you do it right, it's consistent. So it means that you can, set goals around how many new customers do we need, and then you can acquire them so that you can raise that that multiplier of customers up by 30% or whatever your goal might be. So that's sort of the acquisition side, so acquiring customers, and so we're really showing brands how to do that effectively. And if you want to dig into that more, we can, but I'll just leave it sort of at that. And then the second is that AOV, like how do I entice customers to spend more with me each time that they visit? And there's like a multitude of different strategies that you can do for that. Things, and they're all on your website, right? Because that's where the customer is when they're purchasing. So it can be like bundling, cross-selling, upselling. It can be things like post-purchase upsell. So that's something when a customer has already bought, let's just say they've bought a moisturizer off you. They've put in the details, they've paid for it, they've said, yep, I have faith in you and your brand. I'm willing to spend money with you. I've bought a moisturizer. And now the transaction has been made. You can then come back to the next screen. This is a sort of a system that you install on your website and say, hey, thanks so much for buying. Here's a limited time offer. If you would like to upgrade to have the bundle, or maybe it's a product that you see that works well with this with the moisturizer, you can say, if you add this to your cart now, to your order, save 5%, or maybe it's just free shipping or whatever it may be. And that's, we see that work so much across brands. And once again, people can be a little bit scared by the idea of like, the hard sell. But it's how you do it. Yeah. It's how you talk to your customers. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm imagining like when I was a kid watching TV with my parents or my grandparents, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this cool mop on TV. But wait, there's more. If I order now, I used to call my grandparents, hey grand, if we order now, we can get it for free and get shipping, right? It's the online version of what we saw on TV, right? In my mind, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, absolutely. The principles of advertising and the principles of marketing haven't changed for decades. It's just how do you do it in a way that communicates to your customer and speaks their language and speaks to their values and how they like to interact with the world. So, obviously like saying, shouting at them and saying the next 5 customers that buy will receive 20% off, or whatever it may be, that's probably not how maybe your brand would communicate. So the principle still applies. If you do it if you do it now, you'll save some money, and this product complements the other product really well. But the language that you use, the imagery that you use, how you communicate, that's what makes it congruent with your brand. So yeah, look, that's just sort of one example of how you can increase your average order value. And now if just 5% of all the customers that come through your store take the offer, that's going to move your store's average order value up, because 5% of a big number is a lot of people. So it's going to be pushing that average order value. And remember, you only need to increase it by 30%. We're not trying to double it or anything. So that's just the sort of the AOV factor or the multiplier. And then the frequency multiplier is retention, and that's email retention. Email is the most effective way to continue to sell to your customers, continue to communicate with them, to continue to give them value. It has been for a long time, and it will continue to be, because it's it's our main form of communication. So as far as that goes, there's sort of a lot you could dig into on that, but the essence of, or the most important point about email is that it's your owned revenue channel. Like if you advertise on Facebook or Instagram or any other platform, you're essentially paying a tariff. You're paying a tariff to the Facebook owners to say, hey, here's some money. Thanks for giving me access to these people. I'm going to have to give you a portion of my profit to get the customer, and that's cost per acquisition. Now with email, there's not much cost at all. It's just the cost of the software, which is really minimal compared to how much money you make from it and the value you get. And it doesn't cost you every time you want to reach your customers and every time they purchase from you. So that's why things like capturing emails on your website and also cleaning your list, nurturing your list, coming back to the right message to the right person at the right time, segmenting your list so that you're making sure you're communicating to the right people and that you're not being marked as spam or being unsubscribed. All these, I mean, there's so much to it, but making sure you're doing that properly is huge, because just to put it into context, when, for example, when someone like a venture capitalist or someone's coming in to buy a brand or invest in a brand, one of the first things they look at is how big and how engaged is your email list. Because that is a way for you, it's essentially your revenue tap. It's a way for you to continue, because you don't have to pay for it. It's you own it, and people will continue to purchase from you, and that's how you extend your lifetime value, which is the name of the game. That's how you remain profitable as an e-commerce brand, is continue to have a really strong lifetime value. So those sort of a bit more depth around the 3 multipliers and why we use them to sort of conceptualize growth.
Yeah, I like that. Now, I'm curious if, say, a brand were to come to you and, I don't know, are they like brand new brands that are coming to you, like maybe just 1 to 3 years, 1 to 5 years, or do you have brands of all ages coming to you to work with your program?
Yeah, well, we work in the program. We're essentially teaching brands from the fundamentals all the way to what brands are doing that are doing over millions a year. So it's you want to be doing, essentially, if you're starting out, even if you're only doing, we're working with some brands that are doing $1,000 a month. The principles and the foundations of what you should have in place for your e-commerce brand or purpose-driven e-commerce brand are the same principles and foundations that the top 1% e-commerce brands have, and that's why they're the top 1%, because they have got their. It always, I mean, you probably this, like with business, and it always comes back to like the fundamentals. We try to we get overwhelmed with the shiny objects and the flashy, the new thing. This, I need to be doing this, I need to be doing that. But like the 80-20 rule says, most of your results are going to come from those 20%, and those 20% are your foundational 3 multipliers. And so sort of, that's a long way of saying that, we work with brands that are doing $1,000 a month. We work with brands that are doing, over $300,000 a month. And they're both implementing the same tactics, because it's the fundamentals of advertising, of marketing, of how to communicate, how to have a conversation, and then what systems they have in place and what automated systems they have in place, so that you're giving the most to your customers and then also receiving the most back in value via revenue and profit. So yeah, a little less so about. Sorry, you go.
Oh, I was just thinking scalability to do that. I guess I was curious if brands, say maybe they're making $25,000 to $50,000 a month, but they could still use your program, right? Like what I guess where my mind is going is we're at like a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for these 3 different levers, but maybe a brand comes to you that seems to be very profitable, but they might be in a situation where they're like in a 1/2 to 1/4 to 1/4 in those 3 levers. What is something that you see when there's an imbalance? What does that look like for a company, and how do those problems, what kind of problems arise, and what does it look like when they're going through your program to kind of get that to even out? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And look, that 30% for each lever, that isn't a rule. That's not to say that you must increase each by 30%. Some brands will increase, one by 50, one by 20. It's just a way to sort of conceptualize the idea that you want to raise all of them instead of just focusing on one. So that's sort of one point. But I think what you're speaking to is, with a brand that's maybe making between 30 and 50,000 a month, and they've got some sort of imbalance. What does that look like? For one example is that we often see is a brand maybe investing in acquisition, so investing in paid advertising, and they may be doing an okay job. They may be receiving, they may be getting profit out of it, or what appears to be profit, without going too much into it. Like a return on advertising spend is appearing profitable because it's more than one or it's more than two or whatever they're deeming to be profitable. But the problem with that is that sometimes or often the retention side, so the email side, is not being done well enough. And what that means is that it appears like they are doing well, but if they're not really maximizing the customer lifetime value. So customers are coming in, they're acquiring them, but they're not being nurtured. The messages aren't congruent with what they saw when they entered the brand. Suddenly they're being talked to in a different way, or they're being educated about things which they didn't know the brand stood for and things like that. So they're dropping off. And then not only are they dropping off, they're not being brought back in, because there's ways to do that. If people drop out of your customer base, they don't interact with you for a certain number of days, you can bring them back in through automations and through different tactics and strategies. Now, that's often the case. It's that people don't sort of maybe understand or take the time to really invest in a really strong retention strategy. And so that's sometimes one of the things we see. The other thing we often see is brands having a strong awareness campaign, strong awareness campaigns that driving what we call sometimes like vanity metrics. It's getting lots of clicks, lots of likes, lots of page visits, but not seeing the conversions or the profit and the revenue that they need. And a lot of the time, this just has to do with the systems in place on the website, on the email side of things, but also sort of the way that they're interacting with someone. Because sure, people need to be aware of your product at first, but eventually there needs to be a point at which you ask them, hey, I think, because you've earned the sale, right? You've educated them, you've taken the time you've shown that you understand them, and now you're saying, would you like to purchase my solution, my product? And sometimes that final step, which doesn't need to be pushy, it just needs to be there, is left out. And then so the profit or the revenue isn't actually being generated, and people are sort of, they're feeling good because they're getting lots of likes and clicks and page visits. But when it comes down to it, feeling good about your business and then having a business that's profitable and sustainable, it's sort of sometimes two very different things.
Yeah, you kind of need that reason to commit to a relationship.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's like you've got to. You're not gonna. Yeah, there's got to be a call to action eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it's just like a little note folded in like a secret airplane, like, will you go out with me? Let's go out for coffee.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And so, do you have like some metrics that you can share for maybe from your clients, what you've seen as far as growth, looking at from when they started the course to maybe like 12 months? Do you have growth metrics that you can share with us? Or?
Yeah, sure. Well, we had a skincare brand come through our program, and so they were doing around 40 to 50 was their $40,000 to $50,000 a month. And then once implementing, so we worked with them to implement the acquisition side of things, so implementing really effective advertising campaigns, making sure their website was both congruent with that, but also set up in the right systems in place to really capture value and to give value, and then worked to clean up their email, segment it properly, get the right message to the right person at the right time. And they went from, within the 12 months, they went from doing between 40 and 50 to doing between 250 and 300 a month, thousand a month. So that was a really huge, yeah. Yeah, and look, it's yeah, they were pretty happy about it, and but the key is that it's doing it in a way that is consistent each month, and that's what we're really about. Is there are ways to go out there and get a lot of quick money, but they're not sustainable, and often they're not congruent with your message as a brand. And often they're not very profitable. They're just a lot of revenue, but also a lot of expenses and no profit. So it's good to speak about transformations and revenue, but the key is that they're at that place now. They're seeing good profit margins, and they're seeing it every month. So it's sustainable, and what that gives them the ability to do is reinvest into product innovation, into education, and into projects which they hold true to their heart as well, maybe outside of the business. So those are sort of the key metrics as well. They're important. Yeah.
That's so great. Yeah. So do you see brands like as they grow with your program on e-commerce, then do they eventually move outside of e-commerce to maybe like a retail store or their own storefront or another type of distribution? Or do you think it's just like a case by case?
Well, first of all, we help, purely with the e-commerce side. Probably see the opposite, to be honest. We see brands that have either pre-existing relationships with retailers or wholesalers or whatever it may be. Once they see that there's a way to own more of the profit, the lion's share of the profit, by not having to pay as having better profit margins when they sell direct to customer. Also having more control over their messaging and owning the channel, email, they then tend to push more towards that, because the other factor too is that what this whole situation with what's going on in the world at the moment and lockdowns and things has sort of highlighted is that there are a lot of brands that had really strong relationships with retailers in place, and overnight those just disappeared. And I've spoken with so many brands that this has happened to, and it's obviously scary because those were a lot of the time making a large chunk of their revenue and a large chunk of their income. So to have those just dry up overnight has sort of really reiterated how important it is to own the relationship, because one, you obviously make more off the sale too, because you've got lower, you've better profit margins, but more importantly, you own the relationship. They are a customer of your store. They're in your email list. You now have the ability to communicate to them about what's happening, why what you do and how you help is even more important now due to what's happening. Whereas you can't control that conversation if they shop. Sure, they might have some loyalty to your product maybe, but they may just as well get another product now that they've lost that connection through the store or the retailer they were getting it from.
That's very interesting. And I think maybe even up until this point, I had some of these questions prepared right at the beginning of the pandemic, and so what I had been seeing just being out in the field was brands would kind of initially emerge and start on e-commerce, and their eventual goal was to go and have large distribution. But now, as you said, some retailers just closed overnight. Now they're coming back and trying to own that conversation. One of the things I also observed just along that line is when we talked about the sustainability and purpose and being a purpose-driven brand, I often wondered, as a purpose-driven brand, if you were at a retailer or a distribution where it was all about newness and coming out with a new launch, a new product, taking up some shelf space, being part of a promotion, how that might not lend itself to true authenticity for that brand and a brand voice for a purpose-driven brand, I guess. So I don't know, do you see that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it comes down to the old gatekeepers kind of idea, right? You're always at a slight disadvantage when there's a gatekeeper who's controlling the relationship. And so there is always, when you're in a retailer, a supermarket, whatever it may, a chemist or whatever it may be, there is an element that they are somewhat of a gatekeeper, because they do have the final say about what's on their shelves and how they communicate. So yeah, that we see that in some brands, is that they're having to push certain sales or push certain releases because they need to keep their relationships and the people in those relationships happy. And they may not be necessarily what's best for the brand, or they may be a waste of, to be bluntly, a waste of time and resources for the brand as well. They could be focusing it on more important issues of within their brand. So yeah, that is one of the strengths of e-commerce, and it's only going to get more so, because another factor that's occurred during this pandemic is that a lot of older customers, so people who older generation who may not necessarily have been online shoppers, have been forced to shop online. And so there's a massive demographic that are now getting used to shopping online, and even when things go back to some normality, will continue to shop online, because once you start grasping it and realize that, wait on, I buy it on here, sometimes it's cheaper, and it gets straight to my door delivered. Before, it was just a factor of not knowing how to do it, or being maybe frightened of it, being an older generation, but that's going to be gone. And so yeah, all roads sort of lead to that direct to customer relationship, and which is why I think it's more important than ever to have your systems in-house set up correctly. And that's what we're trying to help brands do, and that's what our program helps them do. And we have, sort of, just to explain how the program works, it's a training and video implementation course where we cover it all, and then we have coaching and support, much like this, live Q&A calls, to help brands really implement these strategies and make sure that they're getting them right, getting feedback on them, and also letting them know what's working out there in the space.
It's great that you have that support in the community. I think it's all about community, especially now, right? It's that interesting paradox, right? We're all online, we're so far away, but because this space is so crowded, I personally have found that I am challenged with really digging into where I could be a better communicator. Like, how do I have to be so much more clear in my communication and understand myself, my values, and what I'm trying to say, because there are so many different barriers in terms of not being able to, to sit next to someone or make the kind of eye contact that I would like to. So yeah, it's interesting. I think when we're, I guess, a purpose-driven brands, they have that authenticity and depth of communication. If they're just focusing on those three levers, it gives them time to really hone in on their message, know who they are, be comfortable and confident in relaying that across
Absolutely. Yeah. And an important factor that we haven't really touched on is what this digital landscape does for brands, and why it's so effective, is because you get feedback. So when I was talking about making sure to get your purpose-driven message to market fit, what I mean is that the conversation and how you communicate, what you communicate, your message essentially is an ever-evolving beast because you're learning as you get feedback, whether that be data from your advertising campaigns or conversations you're having with your customers via email or on your store or on Facebook. Like, all that information, you need a way to systematically ingest that into your business so that you can essentially understand your customer better, so that you can serve them better, give them more value. And so that never stops, that discussion and that sort of dialogue. And you're always taking that information and improving and ideating, optimizing your message and how you communicate, so that you're, one, always relevant, and two, continue to improve the conversations and therefore your results as well. And that's an advantage you don't get from, you're not in the store, you're not in the retailer talking to your customer. You don't necessarily get that direct interaction, so that you can actually improve what you're doing.
It is important. And you said nurture earlier in our conversation, and um, I've always really enjoyed that about marketing. It is nurturing. It is a relationship, and it is you're bringing some kind of comfort, and there is a way to do that. And so, looking at that on the ingredient side, um, working with scientists and trying to relate that to like the kind of the cold hard facts, and putting
Yeah.
some context around it of how it is nurturing what the marketers' needs are, the brand's needs, and so they can have greater conversations um, with their customers, and nurturing conversations that are really backed by science and backed by some of those cold hard facts. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, rational facts, rational arguments are important, but they have to be told within the context of an emotional story,
you know,
because otherwise they sort of go they go in one ear and out the other if they're not put into a context of a story, and that really engages your emotion and engages your meaning, hungriness. So that again is why purpose-driven brands have such a big advantage, because it's like built into their DNA. The founder or the mission, the principles, the purpose of the brand are there already. They're real, and you can take that and you can use it to communicate, to position yourself as a leader, to position your brand as an authority, and someone that can be trusted, and that can be used as a source of truth in their market. And that's what people want. They want somewhere to go to be, to say, this is my problem. Who can I trust on this? And you need to be that trusted advisor. And that is done through effective communication and marketing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Andre. I had a few kind of closing interview questions.
Yeah.
So we talked about storytelling, and I'm curious, what is the story that you're telling with your company?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the story we're telling is that, as a natural, sustainable, ethical, or purpose-driven brand, you can make the big change that you want to make in the world, and you can be as effective, as successful, as industry shifting as those bigger brands. And you can, even if you're making $1,000 a month all the way up to $500,000 a month, you can implement the same effective marketing systems in-house in your business. It's not magic. There's a lot of agencies out there that want you to believe that what they do is some form of magic which can't be replicated, and you could never even comprehend what we do, but it's not true. You can understand it. It can be taught. We do it for many brands, and we show them how to bring it in-house and how to effectively grow their purpose-driven brand so that they can, deliver on their mission, and they can then reinvest into projects and into, things that they want to achieve, both in their business and in their life. So the message is that it's possible to do for brands that even have maybe tighter profit margins, or treat their customers more fairly. Their employees more fairly, or source higher quality, ingredients or products. It can be done. It can be done profitably, and it can be done really effectively in a way that speaks to your purpose and to your mission.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. It's very empowering. So, and
Yeah.
what is something that you're grateful for?
Well, I think at this time I am grateful to, as you were saying before, I'm grateful to. Well, I mean, I'm in Australia, so I'm grateful to be healthy, to have a healthy family, to be safe, to have a roof over my head. Like, it's a bit cheesy, but I think one of the things that slowing down has done is made you appreciate the smaller things. Like, I live near the water, and we just got a new puppy. He's like 4 months old. So I've been going for an hour-long walk with my wife down the beach, and trying to do that. We're allowed to be on the beach at the moment, which is nice. And yeah, so there's just the simple things like that, and appreciating that when it's sunny outside. Yeah, cheesy but true.
No, it's actually good. a lot of my friends, I've heard a lot of people are getting puppies. I mean, we even considered getting a puppy.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen because we have like 5 kids and 2 cats. So like, we do not need a dog, but
We got it. Luckily, we actually got it before the lock. We got it before it all happened, so it was just pure luck. It's one of the best decisions we ever made.
That's so great. And what do you think the world needs most right now?
I think what it needs most are people living their purpose. You know, living their mission, leading. You know, leading in their space and their mission and putting themselves out there, and then, you know, empowering people to be able to make better choices more easily, because at the end of the day, as I was saying before, the world is made up of mostly good people. People want to do good things. They want, if you give them the choice, they will take, and both are as easy as the other, they will take the better choice. The more, you know, the choice that's better for everyone. So it's just about how do we provide that that choice for people and provide them the solutions that are better for both them and the planet, so that they can more easily make those choices. And so I think people leading with their purpose, their mission, and doing it and leveraging the tools and the systems and like what we have out there for good. That's what I think is needed.
Great. I like that. My tagline for my business is "Be the solution." Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think we need to be out there, putting ourselves out there. As a new business owner, that was probably the scariest thing. Like this, doing this, it was even really scary. Like I couldn't sleep last night. I was like sweating. I was like, I'm putting myself out there. I was like, but you know, it's needed. It's something that's needed, and the world's not about me. It's about contributing and being together and empowering one another and encouraging one another. So thank you for saying that.
That's right.
And then the last question I have is, what do you appreciate about yourself?
About myself?
About yourself.
Oh, awesome question. Okay, what do I appreciate about myself? What do I appreciate about myself? I think one thing I appreciate about myself is that over the years, I've got more and more forgiving of myself when it comes to the inevitable mistakes and shortcomings that everybody has. You know, no one's perfect, and it's about trying to improve every day and grow. But in the same sense, you have to be kind to yourself when you inevitably fall short of these amazing expectations you have of yourself all the time. So just sort of that kindness and forgiveness, and then which then enables you to take the next step to grow faster and with less conflict.
Well, I appreciate that about you too. I felt your kindness through this talk and the first time we met, and even just connecting on LinkedIn. So I really appreciate your time, Andrej. And yeah, I'm going to have some information about your company. You're going to be on my website as a collaborative partner, and so we'll have information so brands can come and check out your platform, connect with you, and yeah, I'm so stoked to have you as a Dandi Day partner, and that we really can be that solution for one another. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. Look, and if everyone, anyone out there wants more information, as you said, I'm sure you'll have the link on the site. And we actually on the forgoodprofits.com site, we do give free 60-minute strategy sessions. So that is, if a brand is considering or wants to know more, or wants to talk about how they might be improving what they do, you can book on a call. Myself or one of my team sets aside, you know, an entire hour to go through, free of charge, no cost. And we talk about, like, what are you doing in the brand at the moment? What's your strategy look like? Maybe you don't have a strategy. What do you want it to look like? What your goals are, what you think is holding you back from achieving those goals, and then what it might look like for you to achieve those, and what you would, what some of the best strategies might be for your brand. And look, if you choose to work with us after that, that's great. And if you don't, that's fine too. You get some value out of the call. You go away and maybe implement some of those strategies that we go through on the call, and it's a win-win.
That sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And
Thanks, Hayley.